Stories are the most powerful thing on earth. They are literally life and death. Wars are waged based on the story of who is the hero and who is the villain. You are the result of a story your parents told each other, the one-night stand, the soulmate, and friends who became so much more. Life and death. So wouldn't you like to understand them better, these stories? How Story Works, an elegant guide to the craft of storytelling by Lani Diane Rich, demystifies stories and helps you understand why you love what you love, why you hate what you hate, and why prologues are almost always a bad idea. How Story Works by Lani Diane Rich. Available on Amazon in ebook, audiobook, and paperback form. Get your copy today.
Welcome to Still Pretty, a Buffy the Vampire Slayer podcast from Chipperish Media. I'm film scholar Noelle LaCroix.
And I'm story expert Lani Diane Rich, and we are here today to talk about The Body, the 16th episode of Season 5.
The Body aired on February 27th, 2001, and was written and directed by Joss Whedon.
The Body is a seminal episode of Buffy and of television. Like Hush previously and Once More with Feeling, which will come in Season 6, it is both part of Buffy and separate from it. Today's discussion will be centering on, of course, grief. And as we record this episode, we are sensitive to the global grief we're all experiencing to different degrees as a pandemic cuts through our world. We're grieving deeply and personally, and we're grieving collectively. We're grieving our loved ones, our society, and the world as we knew it. That's a difficult and necessary process. But as we discussed this episode, we wanted to give anyone who needed it the chance to back out, save it for later, or maybe skip it entirely. But for those of you who would like to walk through this episode with us, we're going to discuss The Body. All right, so Noelle, one of the things that I noticed in this episode is that it really reads like 5 one-act plays, right? They're all together, they're all linked, but they also kind of work separately. So what I was thinking is that we would go through each one and talk about each one individually, and then kind of summarize our overall impressions of The Body. So one of the things that I did notice also with these 5 one-act plays, and it's possible I might have, massaged these a little bit to make them fit, but I think they kind of map pretty well, is I was thinking about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, right? So I'm going to name them for the 5 stages of grief, partially because I think there is something of a map here. I don't know if that was deliberate or not. And partially because it just makes me feel really good to have like a structure and a framework in things. That is the influence of the wonderful Dr. Kelly Jones, who has been making me better at everything I do since 2017. All right, so Act 1 is what I would call denial. Buffy comes home and finds Joyce on the couch. Joyce has clearly already died, but Buffy is in shock. She calls 911. She tries to administer CPR. She cracks Joyce's ribs in one of the most harrowing things that has ever happened. That's really hard. She waits for the ambulance. She refuses to understand when the 911 operator calls Joyce the body. The EMTs arrive. They try to resuscitate Joyce. Buffy flashes on a future where Joyce is fine. She's fine. But in the moment, the EMTs call it. And they tell Buffy her mother is dead. And they tell her not to disturb the body. And Buffy doesn't respond to that, right? So she goes, she throws up on the carpet. She stares out the back window. Then Giles arrives, sees Joyce, and rushes toward her. And Buffy shouts that they're not supposed to disturb the body. And in that moment, her denial is finally over. And her mother is dead. So that is Act 1, right? The denial act. And there's so much about this that is powerful. I've actually used this episode in my television production classes to show the incredible power of choice within a story, within a film, that how you frame a shot, how you light a shot. Oh my God, the sound design, which is a whole other thing with this episode of Buffy. How incredibly powerful that is. And you, with your background in film, I'm really interested in kind of hearing your thoughts on how you felt the production of this act really worked.
Oh my gosh. There's so much in this. Something that I wanted to say last week and didn't get to because there just wasn't really a good moment. But it doesn't actually matter because it's more relevant here, is that scene that brings us into the episode, which is exactly how last week's episode ended, right? We overlap with the scene of Buffy coming home to find flowers, first of all, which is really chilling when you know that there's going to be a dead body, because there are very few times that we routinely send flowers, and one of those is of course, for, death. But that scene of Buffy coming home, to me, reads like morning. Yeah. And we know it's afternoon because Buffy calls up to see if Joyce wants her to pick Dawn up from school. So it's got to be afternoon. But something about the way it's lit, something about the way it does. I don't know. It does
feel like that.
There's something about that feels like morning, which I feel like is really appropriate here because this is a kind of beginning.
Yes.
Not just the beginning of the episode, but the beginning of this transition for Buffy.
Yeah.
That is, I don't know. I want your story expert opinion on this because we get that opening scene that was our closing scene last week.
Yes.
And then we go to opening credits.
How jarring was that?
Oh my God.
I had to skip them. I had to in the streaming. I watch it on Hulu, and I had to zip through them because we have this moment. First of all, one of the things that they do, I think, which is beautifully done, is they have no sound, right? I mean, well, no, that's not true. They have tons of sound. They have beautiful sound design, but it's all natural sound. There's no music, and music is always used to tell us how to feel, but also to make us feel comfortable, right? Music in a show makes you, or in a film, in a video, makes you feel more comfortable. And when there is a lack of music, you're sort of left to try to figure out how you're supposed to feel on your own. And it is really, it can be really jarring. And so the lack of music in this episode, the lack of that kind of underlying sound design that's kind of like walking you through by the hand emotionally through a scene is not here. What we get, though, is we have this very, very stark lighting in a lot of this part of the show, this part of the episode, where we see Buffy's face, and it is very overlit, and she's got that sheen of sweat. When she looks out the back door and the outside, it's so bright and you can't really see the details.
Sunny. Yeah.
And you hear are these wind chimes going. So all of these things combine to make this opening section feel surreal and somewhat oppressive. It's really tough, and that the credits, the bouncy rock ballad credits, always feel so jarring in the middle of that space.
Right. Well, and it's an interesting transition too from Buffy coming home, the scene that, especially if you are binge watching, and you're going back to back to back, you get to watch this really difficult scene of realization twice, and then you get opening credits, and then post opening credits, we flash back to Christmas, which I think is such an interesting choice. Because it wasn't the last time that everyone was together, but it could easily feel like the last time.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's something really significant, I think, about that Christmas dinner and that family around the table kind of setup, because, as they're talking about Santa Claus and the myth and the reality of that, and growing up, Buffy follows Joyce into the kitchen, and they're clearing the dishes. She's literally following in her mother's footsteps.
Yep.
And there's something about making that transition from child to adult that I think is really lovely in foreshadowing what's about to happen as Buffy has to move from being a community member, essentially, with her friends, to being a true matriarch.
Yeah.
And it's a little, it's some like gender norms a little bit, right? Because we're going into the kitchen to get the pie. And it's such a wonderful jarring crash, when they're joking around, they drop the pie, there's this crash, and then we cut to Joyce's lifeless face. And that's what brings us into this scene of Buffy grappling with the reality of the situation. But that flashback, I know flashbacks are not your favorite thing.
And generally not. I think that the flashes in this section serve a real purpose. As long as flashbacks serve a purpose. Flashbacks I don't like when they're simply used to exposit. Because we feel like there's information that the audience needs to know, and we don't do it. We don't get that information across in a way that is elegant. We go to like, let's show it happening in the past, and so flashbacks tend to annoy me. Here, I feel like the flashback and the flashes into fantasy that we see from Buffy a little bit later as she imagines a world in which everything's okay,
Right.
That these serve a very, very real purpose, that Buffy, while she's staring at her mother and trying to process all of this stuff, that her mind is going to her mother being alive and vibrant and well and part of a family celebration, that she is, going back, forcefully bringing herself back to a place where her mother was there and alive and safe. And that I think is, first of all, a really accurate representation, I think, of everybody experiences grief differently. Everybody experiences everything differently. But I think that that from my own personal experience of grief, that's absolutely something that has happened to me, where I've just, in a moment where it is impossible to be in the world as it is, you go back to a place where it was the way it was supposed to be. And even if just for a second. And so to have that contrast and to have that warmth and the contrast, and we've got like the, the funny, and it's a normal, like there's music, there's warm sound, everything is wonderful and loving and family, and then that gives us even more of a stark contrast with the current moment where Buffy is fighting every second, every frame of this act. Buffy is fighting against this reality until she finally says, we're told not to disturb the body,
Right. Yeah. It also gives us this amazing bit of an amazing opportunity to kind of parallel the movement through the house, right? So we see Buffy leave the dining room in this Christmas flashback, and where she's walking toward us, toward the camera, and then when she, when she's called Giles, the morgue is on their way, or they're going to come to pick up Joyce, and Buffy leaves the living room and walks into the kitchen. We're behind her. We follow her in this really almost, it feels jarring for the show, and not just because we have only diegetic sound and no background music,
right?
But it's handheld and it feels very shaky. And then as she goes to vomit, she drops out of frame in this way that's really uncharacteristic of the show, but it puts us so deeply into her point of view. And I think that just from a production standpoint, from a directorial perspective, that's something that this first act does beautifully. When the paramedic is talking to Buffy and he comes into frame and he's sort of blurry, and then we get a classic reverse shot, but it's framed so strangely. And one shot, when we're looking at her, she's almost eclipsed out of the frame because it's just this like looming presence of this person who's delivering.
And we don't see his whole face either. Everything is segmented Everything is cut off. And that is a very like real, I think, experience of shock too. Like in shock, you experience tiny details, but you don't experience a whole picture, you know? And so that is something that I think is a very accurate representation and just beautifully done.
And it also puts her in this very childlike position of not seeing his eyes because he's out of frame.
Right.
Also gives us the impression that he's very, very tall and she's very, very small,
Yes.
which of course is another great, deep POV experience of her feeling powerlessness and this kind of childishness. There's a childishness that plays through this first act that I really love. Of course, her first line, that brings us into what's going to be the action of the scene is that she reverts from mom to mommy before she goes to shake Joyce and try to revive her. But when she's on the phone, the minute first of all, I love this episode, which is a really strange thing to say about something that is so
wonderful.
difficult to watch.
Yeah.
But I'm fine emotionally until she's on the phone and the 911 operator asks her if she knows how to administer CPR. And she says in this baby voice, "I don't remember."
Yeah.
Which is so heartbreaking because it brings us into this through line that Buffy will have throughout the episode of, I should know what to do. Like I have this idea that I should know what to do.
Right.
And I want to do the right thing because that's the kind of person that I am. But I don't. I know I should know this, but I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know or I don't remember. And when she says, "I don't remember," it's, I don't know. There's something about that, about feeling like you should have a handle on the situation.
Right.
And yet, there's nothing. There's nothing that could prepare someone for this.
Yeah.
And then we get this beautiful depiction of shock when she says, she says very calmly to the 911 operator, "I have to make a call." And then she calls Giles and she's so like no affect, right? And we're just on her face, super, super tight close up. After we get this wild tight close up on the phone, it's so, it looks like comically large, which
I mean, and that is a comic
wonderful
book style framing too of that kind of detail. That is a very comic book thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's ridiculously out of proportion because there's all of this, there's this like emotional zooming in and zooming out that happens. When the paramedics take off and they're going out the door and she says, "Good luck." Once again, it's this big zoom out. She has gone from the tight close-up of pulling down Joyce's skirt and the tight close-up of handling the phone and the tight close-up of looking at the machinery to kind of gauge for heartbeat to there's a whole world out there and life goes on.
Yeah.
And these guys have this is their job. Yeah. They're at work. They have another job that they have to go to. And
Buffy is so ready in that moment to go with them. Good luck, right? She's going with them. She's living in their experience in the moment and empathizing with them because her experience is too hard to be in.
Yeah.
And it's so beautifully expressed. I love that.
And this moment, shortly after where she goes to the back door and opens the back door and we get all of the sounds of the neighborhood and she looks so shocky and out of it. The overexposure of that lighting on her face really reminds me of the desert in Restless.
Yes.
And I'm not 100% sure what to say about that other than there it is and I see it and I don't, you could go into all kinds of like wordplay sort of visual, like it's almost a visual pun of being in the desert or being deserted or just just how oppressive the outside world could feel in that moment. But I don't have like a nice summation of what that lighting is doing.
It is a reference though, like it's bringing you back to this previous experience, this memory of Buffy and Restless and what that was, like for her, and that dream sequence almost feel to it. Like it does feel really surreal. But going back to what you were saying about how it's hard to think about how you love the body, right?
Yeah.
I think that's first of all, like, of course, like I love The Body. I think it's an amazing episode of television. That doesn't mean it's not a really difficult episode. But what I love about it is that it does what fiction is made to do. A big part of what fiction does a lot of things. I mean, you want me to go over to how story works, where I talk about how amazing stories are, right? But one of the things that fiction does is it gives us a chance and a space to process our own human experiences that we are unable to process in our own lives, which is part of the reason why when there is a trauma that somebody experiences in television, film, and movies, and whatever narrative you're engaging with, when there is a trauma, I get very, very angry when that trauma is erased. When we use it for the excitement and the titillation and that rush of adrenaline, and then we don't process it all the way through. Because what this is doing is this is processing this experience all the way through. Instead of using Joyce's death like a fridge, right? Where she dies and we use that trauma, that we use that grief to like motivate our character or whatever, right? We are using Joyce's death to process the idea of death in a show in which death happens every single week. And it's not always human death. I mean, sometimes it is. A lot of times it's just, like her title is The Slayer. Right? I mean, she slays demon after demon after demon after demon, and they're demons, so we don't value their lives, right? But there are people that die. In the high school years, there were children that died, right? And we never went deep into those experiences. We never looked at them deeply because these were, sub characters. These were just, death. And Buffy's focus was to protect people from that, to prevent that. And so she killed all these monsters in order to do that. And that was fine. Like, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. When we have a death or a trauma or something that happens like within the core group, right? That matters to us, it is so important to do this kind of processing, to experience that trauma, to experience that grief. Because even as I'm watching this, right, I'm combing through the tangles of my own grief. I'm combing through the tangles of my own shock and my own trauma, and it heals it a little bit. That's what fiction has the fucking power to do. It's unbelievable, right? So when we erase that trauma, and the thing is that that's one of the problems with Seeing Red in season 6, where we're going to get to that in a while. But
when we get there,
But where Spike attempts to rape Buffy, right? My problem with this is not that Spike does this, because Spike is a vampire. He doesn't have a soul. This is pretty on brand for Spike. It's not what we want from him. We want better from him, but it's pretty on brand. And so when Spike attempts to do that to Buffy, we kind of erase Buffy's trauma from that sexual assault. We've actually erased Buffy's trauma from a number of sexual assaults throughout the run of this show. And when we do that, I get very, very frustrated, because that's an important thing to if you're gonna have the assault, you need to have the process of the trauma so that people who have experienced that can comb through that trauma and heal it a little bit. And instead what we get is, Buffy's upset for a little bit, and then bigger things happen and whatever, it gets, a lot of stuff happens. But but we don't really process that, and we kind of erase her trauma. We erase the trauma that happens to her when she is sexually assaulted. She's sexually assaulted a number of times throughout the course of this show. So anyway, all of that to say, the body does it right. The body gives you a space to process all of that. The body does one of the most elevated purposes of fiction, you know, in our human experience. And I think that is so incredibly valuable. So loving the body, even when terrible things happen to Joyce, is perfectly fine. You should love it. It's an amazing piece of work.
Yeah. I mean, it's always an interesting discussion to have. I think when you talk about, you know, something being a favorite piece of media when it's very, very dark or very tragic or deeply disturbing.
So is life.
Way.
Life is all of those things.
Yep. And I think there's a kind of favorite that is, this is fucking delightful.
Yeah.
And then there's the favorite that is, this feels right.
Yeah.
This feels how this feels. You know, we keep coming back to talking about the lack of any sort of non-diegetic music.
Yeah.
And as I was watching this episode, I was thinking about, you know, when you watch something harrowing, and the music is, you know, big and dramatic and whatever, there is a kind of safety net there.
Yes.
Even when you're watching something that is, you know, tragic or grisly or brutal, non-diegetic music that does not exist in the world of the film or the show.
Music that is added then to the soundtrack.
It gives you this kind of sense of safety, like this is contained within fiction. Whereas I think part of what makes the body so effective in so many ways is that it doesn't feel contained within fiction. It feels very genuine, and it addresses this thing that does not get addressed a lot in media, which is real death, what it's really like when someone dies and what happens to their remains.
Yeah.
And that's a hard conversation to have. And I mean, we'll get to Willow and Anya when we get there, but Willow yelling at Anya for asking the questions that we all kind of want to ask feels very emblematic of this episode and the way it approaches death from natural causes. Is this the first time on Buffy that someone has died not as a result of demonic or supernatural activity? Is this the first?
I think so. I think it's the first like mundane death. You know, as much as we can say mundane, right? I mean, mundane as opposed to magical. You know?
Yeah, I was going to say mundane meaning not magical. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it is. Everybody else got eaten by a giant snake or something similar. So, So I think that, and also everybody else is enough removed. You know, enough removed from the core group that like it doesn't have this kind of impact, you know, that the death of Joyce really does. So I think that the expression of this, the way it is uncomfortably presented with that we're not given music to walk us through and say, this is how you're supposed to feel right now. So feel this way, right? We have to address our own emotional space, you know, in this episode. We have to figure it out. We have to experience it rather than be told and like led through it, which is what non-diegetic music does, you know. And it really is, I think, so incredibly powerful that they made that choice. It is a episode of television that commands your attention and your participation. You can't passively watch the body.
Yes. No, that's a great way of expressing it. You really have no choice but to participate in watching it and experiencing it.
Yeah,
No,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is. It's incredibly powerful. So we move from this first act, right, into the second act, which is anger. Dawn is at school. She's upset about a girl in her class who was spreading rumors about her cutting herself. She goes back to her art class and flirts with a boy named Kevin as they draw a negative space around the figure of a woman's body. Buffy shows up and takes Dawn out to the hallway. She tells Dawn, and Dawn is angry. She calls Buffy a liar. She cries. She falls to the ground as her friends watch from the art room. And this is the thing, Dawn's scene here. When Buffy tells Dawn, when Dawn crashes to the ground while her classmates watch, and we are seeing from the perspective of the classmates, right?
Yep.
We are kept at a distance in that moment. And I think there's something about that distance, that perspective, that out of body, perspective, that is such an unusual decision, because usually you want to go further and closer into the tragic moment. But watching it from a distance, I think is always the moment that I start just fucking weeping, is when Buffy, and oh God, Buffy's face when she has to tell Dawn, oh God, it's so awful.
It's really rough. Mm-hmm. It's really, really rough. Especially because before all of this, before Buffy comes to school, Dawn is having a bad day. Like, she's not having a good day at school.
No.
She's, we cut from zipping Joyce into a body bag to Dawn crying in the bathroom at school. But of course, she doesn't know what has happened yet. She's crying about this girl in her class who is, well, she's crying about
the boy,
this boy that she likes, having called her
freaky.
Weird.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Freaky.
Mm-hmm.
And then she and her friend are talking about, this girl in her class who's spreading rumors and all of that. And she's having a rough time.
Yeah.
She's having a rough time before any of this happens.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about being close, physically with her in those moments, as she's having this very emotionally intense, but pretty normal day. And we have our standard close-ups of her until Buffy comes to collect her from class and then takes her out into the hallway. And I don't know. I watched the episode once with subtitles on and once with them off.
Yeah.
And I actually, I did it in what I think was the wrong order. I think I needed to watch it with the subtitles off first, because at least through my headphones, when Buffy and Dawn are talking in the hallway in that long shot through the glass, there's no audible dialogue.
Yeah.
You can hear kind of the muffled sounds, and there is written dialogue.
Yeah.
They have, it's not ad-libbed.
Yeah.
They are saying, lines to each other that we're just not hearing.
Right.
But at least on my machine, the subtitles do subtitle what Dawn is saying.
Yeah.
In that long shot. And I kind of wish they hadn't done that.
Right.
Because having that removal of her reaction, especially after we've had her in close-up saying, I think she says, it's serious, but she's fine.
Right.
And then we go to long shot and getting Dawn's reaction from a distance through glass and seeing her classmates and her teacher's reaction to what's going on. Oddly, this is the closest I have ever felt to Dawn.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Which is
I understand
a testament to the power. Again, it's a little bit of a picture in a picture.
Yeah.
It's, we're looking at this scene of tragedy through glass in the same way that we have been watching the tragedy through the glass, formerly of our television screens. It's another one of those beautiful fictionalized reality type moments. It really demonstrates how it feels. And I love anytime we get some physical separation from characters who are going through whatever they're going through, because what you as the viewer are imagining is often
so much more powerful.
effective than what is going on an actor's face.
Yes.
Which is not to say that the acting here is not top notch. I mean, if you had any doubts up to this point that these young actors are extremely talented. I mean, I'm like, I just want to start handing out Emmys. Like it's
amazing,
masterful.
It's amazing. It's so good. But you're right that that it makes you lean in, right? When you put distance, like as a director, when you have like a real tight close up on somebody and you've got all of that and close ups. I mean, I'm like. Clearly you need to use close-ups that brings people in, that draws people in. But there are moments when if you put a little more distance, especially during a big, powerful moment, if you put a little more distance, the result of that is that the audience kind of leans in. When the audience leans in, they're more active. Like you as an audience member are actively involved in building this narrative as it goes. You are reading it the whole time rather than having it read to you. Again, that's what the music does. The music reads it to you. When the music is not there, you have to read it. That actively requires you to lean in, right? And I think that's one of the things that this episode really does beautifully is it does require the audience to lean in, and to move closer in order to figure out, in order to see what Dawn is going through and what Dawn is experiencing. And I think that's just beautifully done. I also love that here she is. She's taking this art class, right? And flirting with a floppy-haired douchebag. Every boy in the 90s and early aughts was a floppy-haired douchebag. It is the trope that just keeps on giving. And so she's talking with this, floppy-haired douchebag junior, and he seems sweet though. Like, he's saying that he understands. He's empathizing.
Fine. Yeah,
he's empathizing with her experience. Like, it's fine. But while they're doing that, they are drawing the negative space left by the figure of a woman, right?
Right.
A woman's body. So she's drawing, like, the thing with negative space is that you're drawing what is not the object rather than what is the object. The object is not there, but the presence, the imprint of it is felt, in the space that is left around it. And I thought that was like really nice. I mean, there's an argument to be made that like, okay, a little on the nose, but all right, like fine, go ahead and be clear.
Yeah.
I liked it.
Yeah, and it's super on the nose. And I think there are moments in this episode that are super, super on the nose. And that's fine.
Yeah, it's not a problem.
It's fine. Like it gets us closer to it. It gets us closer to examining this thing that we are grappling with collectively as a cast of fictional characters and an audience. We're very much in this together in grappling with, it's not her. Well, where did she go? She was like, there's, Anya says there's this body and why can't she just get back in it?
Yes.
Like there's no comfortable answer. The answer
where does
that
she
we
go?
get.
Yeah.
The answer that we get really is this idea of the negative space around, which again works into that long shot of Buffy and Dawn in the hallway, showing them in space. It's not just that they're zoomed in on their emotions and close up and reverse shot. It's this grieving, life goes on around them.
Yeah.
High school is still there. They're, Dawn's class is still there.
Yeah.
Drawing the negative space around this figure. It's on the nose, but hell it's on the nose.
Yeah, it is. It's really incredibly, like an incredibly powerful scene. Next we go into, you brought up Anya, and I think we got a wonderful one act play in bargaining, right?
Yes.
So here's what happens here. Willow and Tara are in Willow's dorm room. Willow cannot decide what to wear. Nothing is right. Joyce loved a blue sweater and she can't find it, and Tara tries to comfort her. Xander and Anya show up. Anya talks about Joyce in a way that sounds cold and unfeeling, but when Willow finally shouts at her, Anya Anya starts to cry. She just wants to understand. Death doesn't make sense to her. It is mortal and it is stupid. She goes to sit on a papasan chair and pulls out the blue sweater Willow was looking for, but no one notices, and she stuffs it in a drawer. Xander gets angry and punches the wall. Willow changes her top yet again, and they all leave together for the morgue where they're meeting Buffy and Giles. So the bargaining section, I think, is so great in so many ways, and it feels like one long shot, even though there are edits, within this. But it has that sense of a oneer, that it's this one long shot. And we open with Willow and Tara, and Willow is trying to find something that she can wear, and nothing is right. And she keeps looking for something new, as though if she can pick the right thing, it'll somehow make a difference. It'll somehow make it better. Or if she picks the wrong thing, that it'll make it worse, that there's consequences on this. And I kind of love this.
Oh, God.
Ugh.
It's so good.
I know.
It's so good. This is, when I talk about this episode feeling real.
Yeah. Right?
This is the act that I'm talking about specifically. It feels very, very real. Willow struggling to find something to wear is just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
She's sure that if only she had this blue sweater,
right,
it would make a difference. And I'm so grateful. It's not really a relief, but it's almost there. I'm so grateful to the creative team that have Anya pull the blue sweater out from underneath her and stuff it in the drawer, because Willow's going to find that later when it matters less, and when things have calmed down. I'm like, but there's this little bit of relief for me that's okay. Yeah. At some point you're going to look back at this and be like, oh yeah, I wanted that blue sweater so much. And now I'm,
and now here it is.
Now I'm better. It felt so important. And now here it is. And everything is, a little bit calmer, not okay, but calmer. But oh God, she's struggling so hard with this, purple doesn't mean something bad. And why do all of my shirts have to have stupid things on them? Who she is in that moment feels wrong because she doesn't know what to do. She wants her whole goal is to support Buffy, and she doesn't know how to do it. And she doesn't feel like she's capable of doing what she needs to do. And of course, Tara, once again, with the perfect magic for the moment of just being a loving presence in the room.
Tara is
And this
so
is our
wonderful.
first on-screen kiss for this couple.
I love it. Okay, it was way too long in coming. It was we waited way too long for this kiss. But that said, I do love that our first on-screen lesbian kiss is not sexually coded as isn't this titillating, the way that we had the hint of the suggestion of their kiss in Restless, which really irritated me. Lesbian love is often filtered through the male gaze, which is something that I find offensive. And as a straight person, I find it offensive. I find it really irritating.
Well, because as a woman, it's offensive.
Or as a human. I mean, come on, you don't have to be lesbian to understand that women, two people who love each other and it's not about anybody else, and it shouldn't be filtered through anybody's fucking gaze. But we see that and had seen that up to this point a lot. And we filtered them through Xander's male gaze and Restless, right? And to have this beautiful, loving moment between them. I hate that it took us so long to get to the kiss, but if we had to wait that long, this one is the one. This is the kiss of my heart.
It feels okay. How do I want to express this so carefully, and I'm probably still going to step in it, but here we go. Okay. Everyone who listens to this show knows that I have been I'm on Tara Willow kiss watch, Tara Willow sex watch. It's kind of my whole it's kind of my whole thing. And there were definitely opportunities for them to express their love physically, on camera, prior to this, there were moments when that definitely would have made sense. I mean, we've seen them hold hands. We've seen them snuggle. We've seen them be very physically close. We've seen them dance together and float above the dance floor like the fucking magical lesbian witches they are.
I know.
But we haven't seen them kiss. And part of, and I've expressed frustration with that.
Mm-hmm.
And this moment is so perfect in the lack of ceremony that's involved. It is just a couple kissing the way couples kiss in an emotionally charged moment. It is one partner offering physical comfort and connection to the other in a way that has nothing to do with the sexes or the genders of the people involved.
Right.
And that is fantastic. This is not, we don't have a very special lesbian episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer where, which was a thing. That was a thing in the 90s and the early aughts.
Oh, yeah.
There would be a very special episode where there would be a girl-girl kiss, and it was very sensational.
Yes.
And it had nothing to do with relationships, with real love and human connection. And what I love about this is that there's no fanfare.
It's not othered.
There's no fanfare.
It's not othered.
Yeah.
This is exactly what loving relationship looks like. And the fact that it's two women is not what this is about, and it's not. And
it doesn't make it any more or less than anything else. And
it's more, but only because it's Tara and Willow, not because they're gay.
And it's more because it is so... It's more because Tara is so strong and loving a presence.
Oh my God.
The dynamic, again, that has nothing to do with sex or gender of one partner holding it together while the other one falls apart.
Yes.
I mean,
and it's just an expression of love, and it is a love story. And you know how I love a fucking love story. Yeah, it's, I think, one of the most beautiful moments, and I'm very pleased with it. It was just, it's so touching. Yeah.
And it's beautifully, again, it's beautifully done, and it feels so authentic and not like shoehorned in, like, oh, and now we have to,
and here is our lesbian kiss. Yes,
right?
Exactly.
It kind of happens, and if you're not watching for it, it could almost pass you by. I mean,
it's natural. It's mundane. Our magical lesbians have a mundane kiss, and it's beautiful. Our magical lesbians are mundane
in their comfort with each other, which is especially meaningful when you consider that magic and witchcraft have been the metaphor for their sexual relationship, basically from the beginning of their relationship. It's a beautiful moment, and then it just, for me, continues in Tara's loving strength throughout this scene where everyone is struggling, telling everyone that they should patrol for as long as it takes, going to the laundry room to check for Willow's blue top. She knows it's not going to make a difference, but
But it does make a difference that she went to look for it. Like, that makes a difference. And that's what makes Tara, like, the most amazing. And the thing is, like, I generally don't care for the capital G good characters, because they usually are an affectation. They're not genuine. They're like, look at how good I am. I'm so good. Tara has a deep, resonant goodness to her, and it is part of her character, and it is part of how she exists in the world, and how she interacts with people, and how she interacts with our characters, and what she brings to this this group of people, and she I adore, because she, like, and there's just something, every time Tara's on screen, my heart feels like there's hope just for the world, and the fact that Tara brings hope into every scene that she's in at a time when there isn't a lot of hope, when hope seems to be at a premium, it feels wonderful. So, like, she gets a pass on that capital G goodness, because she is so genuine with it.
Well, and part of her goodness we slowly, we've been slowly unfolding is tied to her experience of being the odd one out in her family, in the Wicca group, in
the
life,
Scoobies.
in the Scoobies. She doesn't really.
She's the one who goes out and thumb wrestles with Dawn. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a little bit tropey, and like the capital G good character is the one who doesn't really fit in the world.
Right.
But at the same time, I feel like, just personally, so many of the people I know who are the most compassionate and kind people have been through some shit.
Yeah.
Have just horrible backgrounds, horrible stories. And Willow expresses that to Tara in Family when she says, seeing where you come from makes me love you more.
Yeah.
And seeing where Tara comes from really shines a light on what she's able to bring to everyone around her.
Yeah.
And it's just,
it's
freaking magic.
It's
I love Tara so much.
It's so wonderful.
I actually love everyone in this scene, though. I feel for everyone in this scene.
I do. Xander the least, but everyone pretty much.
But Xander,
yeah.
If this is our bargaining act, right? We're in bargaining.
Yeah.
Oh God, poor Xander when he is so upset and wants to point the finger somewhere, and he's like, it's the doctors.
Yeah.
They just send her home with, he refuses to just let it be that
to accept, right? Yeah.
Shit happens. Yeah. Shit happens and people die. But he's so that like, I have all of these feelings and I need to put them somewhere. And then, it's not my favorite when he punches the wall, but when Tara pops in and just is like, did I miss something? And Anya says, Xander decided he blames the wall. It's just like, God. Yeah.
So the reaction of the people around him, around the wall is great. Yeah. Him punching the wall. There were a couple things about Xander. I loved his trying to find the place, trying to find somebody to blame, somewhere to put it, somewhere to make it make sense. Like, I liked that with Xander. I liked when he double parks and he's like, let him give me a ticket. And then of course the end shot is that overhead shot of them getting the ticket, The thing I didn't like, I love Anya's process, Anya's journey through this scene where she's saying all these things like, are we going to see the body? Are they going to cut her open? And then Willow just yells at her and she's like, I just want it to make sense. It's mortal and it's stupid. Why can't she just go back in? What is it that takes her away? And I find that interesting coming from somebody who lived, for millennium and was human for a certain time in that.
Yeah, and was human when the responsibility of dealing with the body of someone who had died was the family's responsibility. It was the community's responsibility.
And the mortality rate was so much higher. There's no way she made it to 20 without interacting with a number of dead bodies,
Without losing someone close enough that she would have had to have some interaction with the idea of someone you knew dying.
Yeah.
And at the same time, her monologue about not understanding and, I was having fruit punch and Joyce will never have fruit punch again. Like those minor details that become so huge.
Yeah. It's
in
so
the
good.
Experience of grief.
It's
when
so
it
good.
hits you. That, Joyce loved this blue sweater and I can't find it. Joyce will never have fruit punch or brush her hair ever again.
Yeah.
None of this will, those little things that we glom onto because it's sometimes the only thing there is to hold on to, when the answer to I don't understand and I don't understand why is we don't know. We don't know.
Yeah.
It's
Where is
It's a
she?
lot.
Why can't
Oh
she
my
just
God,
jump back in? It is so much. It is so much to kind of wrestle with on the abstract, you know? But when it's specific, when you're talking about somebody that you knew, like somebody who was a person, and then they're just gone, like
Yeah.
that is that is always hard to wrap your mind around and to understand and to be like, okay, you know. And the thing with Xander that irritated me, I got irritated when he punched the wall, because I'm like, you know what? Everybody has enough to deal with. Willow doesn't need to have to make a call and try to explain and get her, you know, taken out of her
Right.
bursar's account or whatever. Like, that lack of consideration for the people like who have to live there irritated me. And also his snarky, like he made a snarky comment to Anya in the beginning when Anya first started saying these things, and I was like, you know what? Maybe just fucking once, maybe just fucking today, stand by Anya and support her, you know, and don't mock her while she's going through this. So that thing irritated me with Xander. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's in the next. I don't remember if he said something to or about her in the dorm room, but I do. But when they get to the hospital,
He does in the dorm room. Yeah.
He says in the hospital something.
Yeah.
She says, "I wish that Joyce didn't die," which is just like, oh, like we're all there with her, and he's like, Anya, you know, and come on, man.
Yes,
I know that people make
exactly.
bad choices when they're upset, but come on.
Just don't be a
Come
dick.
on,
And
dude.
what I love too is that Buffy looks at her and says, "Thank you."
Yep.
And Jesus Christ. Try
It's
not
a
to
lot.
cry just talking about it. It is so
Oh,
fucking
yeah.
hard. But that moment when Buffy, who is in the middle of all of this grief, looks at Anya and just says thank you and sees what she was saying for what
Yeah.
it was and appreciates it in that moment. Like that is one of the most beautiful moments in this. It's such a small, tiny little thing, you know?
It's so tiny because we so often make fun of Anya for trying to say the right thing. Like
Yeah.
Anya really is doing her best most of the time.
And yeah.
She is trying. And every time Anya says something that is deemed tactless or stupid by the people around her,
Yeah.
she's not setting out to be tactless or stupid. She really is
Right.
expressing what's going on
And
as best she
Xander-
can.
Xander shouldn't know that. Xander is her partner. Xander's supposed to have her back. He knows that she doesn't mean it the way that maybe it comes out, you know? He knows where she's coming from. He should be her translator rather than mock her, you know? And
Right.
that's the thing that drives me crazy about Xander and his relationship with Anya, is that he should be her champion and he is not. And that really disappoints. That's one of the most disappointing things for me with Xander. So moving into this next scene, depression, right? Where we're at the morgue. Buffy, Dawn, and Giles are waiting for the autopsy to be finished. Willow, Tara, Xander, and Anya show up. They all sit together in shock. Dawn goes to the bathroom. She is still angry. Buffy says that she thinks that Dawn doesn't believe her that Joyce is dead. The doctor shows up and says that Joyce died of an aneurysm and she likely didn't feel any pain, which Buffy, of course, reads as a lie. Willow, Xander, and Anya go to fetch some snacks from the vending machine, and Tara sits with Buffy and talks about when her own mother died. And Buffy asks if it was sudden, and Tara says no and yes, because it is always sudden. So this scene is kind of it morphs into, I think, the next scene, which we'll talk about in just a minute, where we kind of get back into a more we kind of smash Buffy's normal expression into this abnormal space. But depression, this one act play that they've got here, which ends with "It's always sudden," I think has so much. So many beautiful moments. The moment when Buffy says to Anya, "Thank you," you know, when they go and they get all of the of the snacks from the vending machine.
Oh my word.
It's
Yeah.
It's just also sweet, but I love so much. I love the interaction with Tara and Buffy, with Tara empathizing and talking about her own mother, and
Yeah.
to give Buffy something to connect with, because it is only in community, right? When you are seen for what your experience is, right? When somebody can see what it is that you feel, what it is that you're going through. The idea of not being alone, right? Is so incredibly powerful. And here we are, with and I find it really interesting that Willow is so concerned about the shirt she's going to wear, which doesn't matter. Goes and gets all of these things from the vending machine, which doesn't matter. While Tara sits down and just sees Buffy. And I think that's one of the most healing things that anyone could have done.
There's some beautiful visual shorthand in that shot of Buffy and Tara sitting together. They're sitting on two sections of this bench. Yeah. So they're literally sitting on the same plane. They're sitting in very much the same position.
Yep.
In terms of where their arms and their legs are positioned. They're both kind of, very like internal. Yeah. Their arms are sort of, keep your arms inside.
Right.
The space of the chair, but Buffy looks just awful, as she should, and she's hunched over and sort of folded in on herself. And Tara is still very contained in the way that Buffy is, but she's sitting up straight. She's sitting with, a straight spine because she's there with Buffy, but she's not in the same pain that Buffy is in. She's able to just sit with her, but with this distance, this little bit of distance from her own similar but different experience.
Right.
And I love the way she says, I know it's different for you because it's always different.
Yeah.
Which is fuck, man. I mean, it's just like the best. Like, that's exactly the thing to say. It's not, I know what you're going through because my mother died when I was 17. It's, I know some idea of what this might feel like. And just being that, again, Tara with the magic of like being a loving presence is fucking amazing.
So good.
But I want to zoom back really quickly to how this act opens, which, first of all, each act opens with a bird's eye view of Joyce's lifeless face, which is a beautiful choice.
It's a connective tissue between all of these. It anchors us in what we are still talking about,
Yeah. This is still about this body. And this scene, this act opens with Joyce post-autopsy being covered with a sheet. And then we enter into the waiting room with the doctor. We walk with the doctor in this long take out of the morgue, down the hall, into the hospital waiting area where everyone is waiting. And that contrasts so beautifully with everyone in the waiting area where we see everyone sort of arrive and it's communicated in these dissolves. So they're hugging each other and the hugging is fading into other hugging. We see, Willow and Buffy hug and then it fades into, I don't remember who, although I did notice that Xander hugs Giles like it's no big deal, which thank God. Thank God, man.
Yeah.
And then Anya hugs Giles with all the force of a small child.
Oh, God, that is so... and his reaction to her.
God. Yeah.
Oh, God, it's so sweet.
Yeah. And this act is also where Buffy revisits her fantasy of the miracle of Joyce's possible survival, which... ties us back into where we started, which feels like a million years ago by this point.
Yes.
It feels like so long ago. And it's been what?
A half hour, maybe, at this point. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of, if you think about how long this would take for Buffy to go to school, to recover enough
time in
to be able to go to school, to get Dawn, to meet everybody at the morgue. What?
Couple of hours?
A few hours, maybe?
Yeah. I mean, I can't
Maybe.
imagine, like, not that reality is no defense, nor is a condemnation for fiction, but like the idea that the autopsy would happen immediately and they would wait for the doctor to come out
for
after the
sure.
autopsy,
Yeah.
like that's all ridiculous. But I'm glad they're all there. Like, I'm glad
Right.
there's like a process that they're doing.
And there's and if you're looking for accuracy in this episode, there are a few things,
Yeah, it's not about how it is, it's about how it feels. This is how it feels.
And yet, this is still, I think, one of the most accurate depictions of
The experience.
I'm putting air quotes around natural, but natural death
Yeah.
that we see certainly on this show. But,
Yeah.
God, on TV in general in 2001 when this aired, like there was nothing like this, which is another reason I love it.
It's so great.
But this act is really interesting in the way that it contrasts the mundane, like what is mundane for this doctor. He's at work as he's performing this autopsy, and then he just walks out of the morgue and into the waiting room like this is part of his job. Meanwhile, this group of people is having this hugely emotional experience.
Yeah.
He does this every day as part of his work, and they do this never.
Yeah.
This is, Buffy says, like, obviously I've never done this before.
Right.
Oh God, and the bridging the two when Giles takes over the paperwork
Yeah.
for Buffy.
Oh God.
That breaks my heart. That breaks my heart in a million pieces.
Yeah. It's such an act of love,
And also, holy fucking shit that you have to deal with
Paperwork.
the mundanity of paperwork.
Sure, when somebody has died, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's wonderful. But the depression piece, if we're going on theme of Buffy, Willow is encouraging Buffy to eat.
Yep.
Buffy doesn't want to eat. Dawn is going to the bathroom, and I think Buffy asks her if she needs any help, and she says, "I still remember how to pee," which just again, my heart,
Yeah.
my heart. But oh God, that magic of just being together when something
Yeah.
unthinkable has happened.
Yeah. I mean, it is.
Damn.
That whole sense of community, is so important. And this is like, and the when you see Buffy, like you were talking about Buffy sitting next to Tara, and how drawn, Buffy looks, how small, how almost collapsing in on herself, she looks.
Yeah.
But then Tara is there with her. And that's the thing, like, to try to make somebody feel better, which honestly, like, I'm not going to lie, is my go-to. I am the jester that comes in and distracts you with shiny things. Like, that generally tends to be my role. But the power of sitting in the dark with somebody and saying, I see you and I see what you're going through and it's terrible. And not trying to make it better. The power of that, like, actually does make it better. Because it's knowing that it's being alone in something like this is where it is truly, truly the hardest, and for Buffy to not be alone and for Tara to be the one who gives her that, I think is just, it's so beautifully expressed. So then we move into Act 5, acceptance, right?
Yeah.
I have always hated this part. Of all of the body, this has
Really?
always been my
Okay.
least favorite. But now that I'm looking at it through this lens, I actually like it a lot more.
Through the lens of the 5 stages of grief?
It's not just the 5 stages of grief, but that it is... We open up this episode separating from everyday life on Buffy, like what an everyday
Right.
episode of Buffy is. And the thing that I like about the end of this, I always hated it because it felt out of, like, Dawn goes into the morgue. She tries to reach to take the sheet off of Joyce's face. She decides not to do it. And then a body rises up in the background. It's clearly a vampire rising. Had been recently autopsied. And then she's attacked. So Buffy, who is out, in the waiting room area, has a sense that something is wrong. She finds Dawn. She kills the vampire. And so we have a vampire slaying. We have Buffy fighting. And it feels like in this episode, like, that just does not belong. Then we get through the course of the fight. The sheet was pulled off of Joyce. Her face is exposed. Dawn stands up and reaches her hand out. And before she can make contact, we cut to black, right?
Yeah.
I always hated this part because it felt out of phase with the rest of it. Why in this viewing I suddenly get it and I understand is that it is the fact that regular life does not wait for you to get over it. Regular life does not give you the time and the space to process everything. Regular life will find you and it is going to smash right into that existence. And so Buffy's regular life is slaying vampires, right? And yet here she is in this environment where she doesn't have a wooden stake and she doesn't have the tools that she usually has. And she is already, so diminished. I mean, remember how tiny she looks in the scene before, it's almost as if they actually shot her to look tinier. I mean, Sarah Michelle Gellar is not a huge woman to begin with, but I mean, she's, she looks so tiny. So here she is going back into, like, having her regular world smashed into her in this violent, cold, clinical way and in a clinical space. And she uses a sharp metal, medical saw to,
I think it's a bone saw
to take off the head and to kill the vampire. So she does that all while Dawn is staring at her mother's face. And then we have this shot where we see Buffy, she's on the ground, she's panting, she's just fucking trying to get through the goddamn day, She goes up, she lifts up off the floor, and then we pull out and we see Dawn's face come into the shot, and then we pull out more and we see Joyce's face come into the shot, and we have these three women, and Dawn reaches out and it doesn't touch. We don't see her connect with her mother because you cannot ever connect again. That even if she touches the face, her mother is not there. And so in this moment, like, thinking about this as the acceptance, right? Acceptance is this moment where life continues. Your life is going to pick up and it's going to be violent and it's going to force you back into the day-to-day, even when everything else is wrong and broken. So this is the watch. I've seen this episode, I don't even know how many times. This is the watch when I have finally made my peace with that ending. When I understand that ending. I have always resented the fuck out of regular everyday bursting its way into this moment for Buffy. But the reality is that's the experience. That's what regular life does. And so I finally get it and I finally understand it. And now I kind of love it.
And I love the contrast, just to wrap up the difference on the show between, I keep saying natural death, and that sounds judgmental and problematic to me, but I guess what I mean is mundane death and supernatural death.
Exactly.
We have to bring a vampire into it, not because this is Buffy's reality. And of course, life goes on. That's been visually and auditorily reinforced throughout the episode, right? Life goes on regardless of where you are mentally or emotionally. But it's also the two kinds of death that we deal with, or rather don't deal with on Buffy. We are used to this one kind of death that is supernatural, undead, demons, the Slayer doing her Slayer duty.
Yeah.
But there's this whole other world of death that we literally cannot touch, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just not, we can't wrap our minds around it in the same way that we can, as odd as it is, you know, a body rising from the dead as a vampire.
Yeah.
I love that the chapter on acceptance starts with Dawn taking herself to the morgue. Thank you very much. I mean, you know, she has been asking to see the body and not quite shot down, but kind of eclipsed out of the conversation until finally she's just like,
fine.
No,
Yeah.
I'm fine. I'll go on my own.
Right.
There's something brilliant about the Scoobies coming back with everything from the vending machine. We panicked.
Yeah.
And Buffy just says, which is an acceptance both of the situation and also of her friends and how they, you know, when they don't know what to do, they do everything, which is very sweet. And I just love the little coda that Anya gives us of the sandwiches are meat.
Oh, God. I love
I don't
her
know
so
why
much.
that's so good, but it
so
really
dear.
is.
It really is. Yeah.
And when Buffy goes after Dawn, there's something struck me about the sign that's on the door that says authorized personnel only. And what an interesting reminder that is.
Yeah.
That caring for the dead used to be the job of the family. And in some parts of the world it still is. And here there's this long hallway. There's this door, this very official door and long hallway that separates these two young women from the reality and therefore the acceptance of the fact that their mother is no longer alive. You know, and that last little bit where Dawn looking at Joyce says, "Is she cold?" And Buffy doesn't answer the question. She says, "It's not her."
Yeah.
And Dawn says, "Where'd she go?" And this, like, oh, it's so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because, of course, that's been the question all along. Like, we can't, you know, where did she go?
Right.
We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know. It's, I also have mixed feelings about the vampire rising in the morgue.
Yeah.
But I wonder also if we're supposed to.
Right.
If we're supposed to be, because it feels annoying.
It does.
In a way.
It really
I'm
does.
like annoyed.
It feels out of phase with the rest of it, you know? Yeah.
I'm annoyed on behalf of Buffy and Dawn, but also on behalf of the story. Like, part of me is like, come on, narrative. But,
right. But I
but
like
it also,
it. It's experiential. This whole episode is extremely experiential in that it translates the experience of this into, you know, light and sound, you know, that allows us to feel what it feels like. And when whatever your vampire is, you know, shows up after you're dealing with all of this shit, it is irritating like that. It is annoying like that. And I think that is an accurate expression of the experience, you know, and so even though it's always irritated me, it's always annoyed me, I think that it's supposed to. I think that is the intent of it. And in that case, I think it's absolutely well done.
Yeah. I think it's meant to be kind of irritating.
Yeah.
You know, especially after all of this emotional, mental and emotional anguish.
Yeah.
We have a physical fight at the end of the episode, which, if you hadn't noticed the lack of non-diegetic music, like when the fight starts, holy shit.
We're right back.
It's like, oh,
yeah,
what a fight sounds like and feels like without the, you know, but you know, it's like, it is a different experience. But even in grief, I mean, the body of the Slayer is still on duty.
Yeah.
She doesn't get a break from fighting just because her mom's dead.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Oh God, no! It's so incredibly powerful and so well done. All right, so let's wrap all this up. You had some really like fascinating insights into kind of this episode as a whole. So now that we've gone through all of the sections, I'd really like to hand it over to you so that you can kind of like share all these thoughts you've been having with us.
I have lots of thoughts about this episode. Some of which I've gotten into already, but there are. This episode is pointedly not a very special episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, right? It deals with death, which is very normal and mundane in a lot of ways, but has a huge impact on the lives of everyone who knew that person.
Right.
So we get there's this real push-pull of death and what that means and how grief can create a heightened state that makes everything that is not related to the grief, for example, Xander's parking ticket, seem wholly insignificant.
Yes.
Something like dropping the pie on Christmas, Christmas night or for Christmas dinner. In the moment, in that, in the context of that Christmas dinner, burning the pie and then dropping it was probably among the worst things imaginable for the moment.
Right.
But of course, the worst thing imaginable is so context specific and malleable.
Yes.
And I think that that's something that the way the entire episode is shot, the number of overhead or bird's eye view or long shots that we get that gives this zooming out to zoom in sort of sense of, life goes on over and over and over again. The episode through visuals, through sound reinforces the idea that, you are very much, while you've got these grief blinders on and, the most important thing right now is having the blue sweater or, going to the school or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Life is going on and it is so difficult to grapple with. It's one of the many things that's difficult to grapple with. Yeah. But something I got curious about in this episode was the idea of bodies in the body. I talk a lot on the show about the physicality of the characters because that's just something I'm super, super into. But in an episode called The Body, it seemed, I don't know, especially noteworthy to look at representations of physicality and what that means in connection with who we are as individuals. And there's this lovely through line, this little thread of the physical body and the relationship of that to our person that kind of flows through the whole episode, which I'll take us through really, really quickly.
Yeah.
Starting with Christmas dinner, where we're talking about fullness and the deliciousness of food and throwing up because of the deliciousness of food. Intoxication when Dawn says she may have gotten some nog with rum in it. Physical touch. Tara says to Willow, want me to rub your tummy because she's too full. And Dawn, when they're discussing Santa Claus, says, hello, puberty, as though the physical connection, the physical change is connected to the mental emotional change, right, of the belief in Santa Claus. Right. Which, of course, is a discussion about growing up, stages of life, believing in something mystical in this way, which, of course, Anya lovingly explains is, no, it's real. This is a real thing.
Well, also that he disembowels. Like that Santa Claus disembowels young children, that is also like an incredibly, like what's more like literally visceral than the disembowelment, Yeah.
Yeah. And talking about real, talking about Santa Claus is talking about what is real and what isn't. And in this case, real in the sense of being corporeal. Yeah. Right. Being embodied. Yes. Because you could easily make the argument, and, many a Christmas movie has, that Santa Claus is real in the sense that a shared belief, a shared cultural story makes something real, a shared metaphor makes something real. But the reality that the Scoobies are discussing around the Christmas dinner table is real in the sense of being a person and having a body. Yeah. And in this case, of course, Santa Claus is. Which brings us a few minutes later to Buffy's conversation with the 911 operator about Joyce being cold. When the operator says the body is cold, and Buffy blanches and says, "No, my mom." Oh, God. What is the relationship between a person's physicality and the reality of their existence? And if those two things are the same, then what happens when someone dies, and how do we navigate this transition from embodied to a body? Which Buffy, we see Buffy try to wrap her mind around that just a few moments later, pulling down Joyce's skirt before the paramedics arrive. And that is a gesture that's about the dignity of the person. It's this tiny little gesture that speaks to Buffy's relationship to the physical body of this person that she loves. And for anyone who likes to nerd out about that kind of thing, about the relationship between our bodies and the body of a deceased person, I recommend Here If You Need Me, which is a book by Kate Braestrup. She is she's a Unitarian Universalist minister. So if God talk is not your thing, maybe skip it. But she has some wonderful things to say about those relationships, like what it means to care for the body of a deceased loved one. And then, of course, just to continue, the physicality of this experience for Buffy, her physical body responds to the stress by vomiting, which, of course, is a tragic echo of the threat of sickness after Christmas dinner as she's making that same journey into the kitchen that she made in the Christmas flashback. But it's telling Giles we're not supposed to move the body that seems to jostle Buffy out of her calm shock and into actual grief for the first time. This is her first moment of a glimmer of acceptance of the reality of the situation. And it shows up as a changed relationship to her mother's physical form. It's the power of naming, referring to Joyce as the body. She becomes the remains of a person, which is an interesting twist on the objectification of last week. Right? Because in death, someone becomes a body. Right. Which is a testament to both the permanence of death and their former humanity. And vampires, as we're reminded in the final moments of this episode, leave nothing behind when their afterlives come to an end. There's a little bit of dust, but it's almost as though they were never there. Well, Joyce, on the other hand, was very much was there. And that is what's so confusing to Dawn and the Scoobies. Buffy says of the body in the morgue, it's not her. And Dawn asks, where did she go? And there's no answer. Except to cut to black, as though the visual medium itself is saying, I don't know. Right. Yeah. And Dawn's act, the scene, the sequence that takes place at the high school, if we're looking for physicality there, it's much more about language than about actual physicality. Although the subject of what emotions and specifically what crying do to a person's face is a topic of discussion. Dawn says she looks like a wet rat after crying. And the subject of processing stress through the body via self-harm comes up as well. As Dawn is in art class and not drawing the body of the statue at the front of the room, but the space around it, as we talked about. So here in high school, metaphorically, bodies are about looks, but they're also the site of pain and anxiety, which is something to be managed or fought against or dissociated from in the sense of, that image of the space around the statue. in Dawn's drawing. It's a different take on the physicality that makes us real, but I think it really speaks to where Dawn is mentally and emotionally, especially as connected to being the key, worrying that she's not real, and taking that anxiety out on her own physical form. Of course, then we go to Willow changing clothes, which is about showing up physically for someone, right? She wants to look right. Whatever that means. What it means to show up physically for someone in a loving way with how you present yourself. And Tara echoes that by comforting Willow physically, holding her and kissing her, which is something we talked about already. They have this sweet little moment that plays like an in-joke where Willow says strong like an Amazon, which I think is a reference to the Frank song Amazon, which is largely about the achievements of female athletes and about their physical bodies. I mean, she opens the song by singing about muscles, like literal physical muscles. So in other words, strong like an Amazon physically. Yeah. Again, it's about the living physical body. And of course, Xander punches the wall. Not my favorite, not your favorite, but again, moving grief and upset through the body. And when he manages to get his hand out of the wall, then there's this shot where everyone just quietly like looks at his hand.
And the blood.
And it's bloody. And Tara says it hurts.
Oh, God.
And it's this shared recognition of what Anya has been talking about. You know, Xander is in pain and bleeding, but he's going to wash his hand off and get a Band-Aid and he's going to be fine. And Joyce's body no longer functions this way. And again, how do we process this? How do we understand the relationship between our living bodies and our experience of grief and the body of this person who was and now somehow is no longer? And then moving into the hospital, of course, everyone hugs, and the physical touch and comfort dissolve into one another. So we're hugging in a group, but it's kind of a blur. Yeah. Willow suggests, of course, that Buffy eats something and then goes with Anya and Xander to hunt and gather all the vending machine foods. And Dawn has to pee, which is, you know, like so vulnerable.
And so very
so
embodied.
Vulnerable.
Yes.
Very embodied. And her sweet, I know I called it out already, but it just, there's something so nuanced in the anger and the frustration and the sadness of her saying, I still remember how to pee.
Right.
And of course, you know, the episode ends with a physical fight. We started with a physical bone crack of Buffy attempting CPR on her mother and ends with the physical crack of this bone saw going through a vampire's neck. And it's the same, but not. And the body of a slayer is always on duty. Yeah. No matter what. No matter what. Dawn is trying to grapple with the emotional reality of what's going on. And of course, it's her physical self that is in danger from this vampire. It's a tricky thing. Yeah. And there are no answers. And that is part of what makes it so wonderful.
Yeah. No, it is. It's really like beautifully expressed. And I love that whole run that you just did. I think that was amazing. And thank you. I love you.
I love you too.
All right. So Noelle, here we are at an exhausting hour and a half of talking about the body and processing our grief. What is your favorite part of this?
Oh my God. What is my favorite part? That is hard.
It is hard.
It's hard to pick a favorite part. I think it is the bargaining act. I think it's the Scoobies all trying to rally and not knowing how. And oh God, I know what my favorite part is. I know what my favorite part is. When Xander and Anya show up and Xander asks Willow how she's doing.
Oh.
and she's got her arms folded across her chest, and she just kind of shakes her head and rolls her eyes in this way that's so recognizable.
Yeah.
Like, there are no words for how I'm doing.
Yeah.
I think that's my favorite part.
Yeah, there's so much here. Like, I really kind of love all of it, and trying to pick out my favorite part. Like, I get the kiss with Willow and Tara, I think is possibly one of my favorite parts. But when Tara says it's always sudden and sits with Buffy, when Buffy says thank you to Anya,
Yeah.
when Anya pulls the blue sweater out and shoves it in the drawer, when Willow puts up her dukes and says, come fight me. And
Yes.
then Xander says, you know, I couldn't take you.
Yep.
So yeah, like there's 5 right there. Like, it's all,
Right.
you know, it's all so incredibly, incredibly good and incredibly powerful, and really one of the most beautiful episodes of television that has ever been made. And there are a lot of amazing episodes of television in this series. There's a reason why so many people are still talking about Buffy 20 years later. And
Yep.
and this is a big part of it. All right, this episode of Still Pretty was brought to you by the Chipperish Media producers who support us on Patreon at the Power Producer level. These people are the reason why Still Pretty is coming to you free and ad-free right now. So thank you to our July producers, Abigail, Alice, Erica, Rose, Jonathan, Kristen, Sarah, and Shelley.
To find out how you too can support Chipperish Media, visit patreon.com/chipperish. We will be back next time with Forever, the 17th episode of season 5. We'll see you then.